Hello again, and welcome to this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. We got another great episode for you. We're kind of talking cutting-edge shooting stuff. I'm talking to Erick Gelhaus, who, of course, is the editor of AmericanCop.com, and in today's episode, more importantly, he's a well-known instructor with Gunsight Academy. Erick brought to my attention something called soft focus shooting, and it's a kind of sighting technique where you don't really look at the target, you don't really look at your sights. So Erick's going to explain it to us and give his opinions on whether this is the newest, latest, greatest thing, or maybe just the next technique of the week that'll be a flash in the pan. But before we get to that, here's a quick word from our great sponsor, 4Patriots. Prepare for those just-in-case situations with delicious and long-lasting emergency food kits from 4Patriots. These survival meals will give your family the energy they need to get through any emergency. Their survival food kits are a great combination of taste and shelf life, making them perfect for any situation. And as a special offer to the Guns Magazine podcast audience, if you go to 4patriots.com/gunmag, you'll get weekly special deals and discounts. That's 4patriots.com/gunmag. Well, good afternoon, Erick.
Good afternoon, Brent. How are you?
I'm glorious, and thank you for joining us yet again. You were just on not too long ago, and we talked about the Okaloosa County, Florida shooting, the Acorn shooting, if you're familiar. And I've got to laugh that we had a very thorough conversation, and we both went in saying, you know, it's kind of a silly situation, but there were some reasons. So we tried to take a very middle of the road kind of view of the whole thing and let, you know, the listener, the reader, the viewer decide for themselves. And of course, we both got emails and comments that you were too nice and you were too mean. It's like, people, can you make up your minds? Come on, really?
And the amount of folks who missed, I think, my first line, which was, I read the whole report and I agree with what the investigator decided, right? Or whatever the exact verbiage.
So, well, if you haven't seen that or listened to it, go back and check out the Okaloosa County shooting. And we presented it so you can decide whether it was a good thing or not. So anyway, but today, Erick, you brought up another topic that I will be honest and admit I didn't know this was a thing. Now, granted, I stay off the interwebs as much as possible. I like to stay in my little discreet corner where there's physical books and magazines, but you are much more active on the internet and the forums and all that, because you are a active teacher out at Gunsight Academy, in addition to being the AmericanCop.com editor. So you need to stay abreast of all this stuff. And you were telling me about this thing called soft focus shooting. And when we were talking about it, I thought, okay, I could see this, because probably the bigger question here is, basically we're talking about a technique of the week kind of thing, and folks get their undergarments in a twist because they've found out something, and then the endless debate starts of whether this is a good thing or not. So for folks that aren't up on the interweb forums, what is this soft focus shooting that we're talking about?
So I don't think it's a technique of the week. It just may not be one that's cut on widespread yet.
Yeah.
The idea behind it is, let me back up. You're still going to use the sights. The sights are still involved. What you're not doing, if you subscribe to this, is the very hard focus on the front sight. So when I say it's not new, I first heard about this in 2010. A little bit different terminology to it. I was taking a pistol class, and it was being taught by a gentleman my age, so 45 at that point. And what he had said was that his eyesight had gotten to the point where it was very difficult for him to focus on the front sight clearly. So what he was shooting was the close blur, the sight, the front sight on the pistol, in the center of what he was trying to hit, the target, right? So close blur, far blur, kind of the way Pat explained it. And Pat came from an organization in the U.S. Army that did a lot of pistol work at a very high level. And for me, I found
one of the secret squirrel groups that's actually out there shooting people, right?
Yes. And I'm not trying to do the cool by association thing and say he works
Right.
here.
Yeah.
So what I found for me is as I got more into having to wear glasses, and I'm going to pick up a blue gun here and demo this. This is my normal sight. Sorry, I didn't mean to blind everybody with light, but this is my normal sight picture. I start trying to see the front sights with my glasses on. See how I have to start tipping my head back?
Mm-hmm.
The problem when I start tipping my head back is where's my balance going? Right. So if I can work close blur, far blur, a little bit easier. Of late, last couple years, there have been some pretty high-end competitive shooters, either currently or formerly high-end competitive shooters, who started talking about this soft focus. And what I had noticed, the more I shot dots and transitioned my eyes, my process to target focus or threat focus, that it was easier to use a soft focus on the iron sights. So what they're talking about, as best I understand it, as best I've kind of tried it, is I'm not doing a very hard focus on the front sight. I'm letting the sights appear in my line of sight to what I'm trying to hit and work it there. And before the folks raised their hands with the pitchforks and torches and like, you have to focus on the front sight, I understand where folks come from that. But I asked, when you grew up playing sports before you started shooting, did you focus on the baseball in your hand? Or did you focus on the guy you were trying to throw the baseball to? And were you just looking at the whole person, or were you specifically looking at that glove when you were trying to throw it? For those of you who may have started out with a football, and I was no more successful throwing a football than I ever was a baseball, but I'm looking at the hands of the person I'm trying to throw it to, or I'm looking at a specific spot and trying to throw the ball. Right? We've done that for millennia. Right? We've looked at what we've tried to hit, launch, projectile, rather than looking. So there's some kind of human evolution stuff.
So I'll play the devil's advocate here, and you teach at Gunsight, and the doctrine is front sight focus, which is, as my friend, the CEO of Gunsight says, Ken Campbell, if there's a bug on your front sight, you should be able to tell what color his eyes are when the shot breaks. You need that kind of focus. But basically what this is saying is, maybe that's not quite so important. So the problem is a lot of shooters who are not as experienced or trained or skilled tend to do this target focus, and it's kind of a crutch or not a crutch. What would be a good way to describe it? They're not doing it right. And they're not shooting with the precision because they're not using the sights. They may say that they're doing a soft focus, or with a target focus, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't up close. I mean, everybody admits that. But when you're trying to take a precision shot over some kind of distance, you've got to look at that front sight, right? So is this going to be, you don't need those sights?
No, the folks that are pushing this are not saying you don't need the sights. What they're saying is you don't drive a level of visual attention, visual focus to the front sight to where you can see the color of the eyes on the bug that's on them, right? I mean, I can think of focusing on the front sight to the point where I could tell you where the cut was in the ring around the tritium insert. Okay? We're not saying that's bad, but the folks who would kind of push this soft focus are talking about is I'm still using my sights, but my attention is on the target, and I'm letting the sights appear in my eye target line and working that sight alignment from there. Right? I just don't have a traditional sight picture, or at least the visual attention isn't such that it gives a traditional sight picture. I understand it from having shot dots, right? That we are looking at what we're trying to hit and let the dot appear on that, rather than focusing on the dot, and that brings up a whole separate set of problems when people start focusing on the dot, because the dot seems to move a whole lot more than the iron sights did. We're not there. It is a way. I very much think it is a way. And we started to talk about people's capabilities, and I think the analogy we used was you don't take the 20-year-old who's driving an economy car and throw him into a car at Indy on Memorial Day weekend. Right? Yes, he could physically drive the car once he learns where the controls are and how they work, but not everybody's wired or experienced to the point that they can pull that off successfully.
Well,
Go ahead.
that makes sense. So explain the kind of dichotomy here of what you were saying. I've experienced the exact same thing. As you reach a certain age, especially if you're wearing glasses, you tend to do this to see that sight in focus. Whereas if you start, I think you said, which blurry object are you going to focus on?
Yeah.
But what you were just saying, though, is this is not a skill that the vast majority of folks are going to ever be very good at. So
I think
where does all that lie?
I think they'll be good enough, right? At some point, there's going to be the transition, right? Like I know that if I start trying to throw my head back to be able to look out the bottom of my progressive lenses to get a crisp, clear front sight picture, I'm off balance and I can't fight, air quotes, effectively at that point. I don't know if it's the only way I would ever shoot would be this soft focus. I think working a dot helps with that transition. I don't know that I would start day one with a brand new shooter trying to push this. I would want them to understand the relationship between rear sight, front sight target, so they understand what sight alignment is. Right? And again, I'm not at a level of the professional shooters who have talked about pushing this. I just know how the close blur, far blur, it was originally explained to me, works, and how making a transition from dot back to irons lets me do a soft focus where I don't have to drive all of my visual attention to a very crisp, clean front sight. I'm not saying front sight focus is bad. I mean, we clearly still teach it, but this is something that's worth discussing for some folks.
Yeah. And that's the reason we wanted to talk about it today. So again, this seems to be one way to address the older shooter that's having trouble seeing that front sight, especially without leaning back. But we were talking before we got started recording, there's not a lot of folks that can do this very well. And it seems like the folks that are doing this well, as you pointed out, are the world-class competitive shooters and the folks that literally go to the range and shoot at targets and people every single day. And most of us, the normal earth people, as we say, aren't doing that. And you use the analogy, the 20-year-old going to Indianapolis on Memorial Day. Does that tell you that maybe this isn't something we need to have that conversation about?
I think it should be discussed, right? Like I think folks should try it and see what works for them. But one example of where it works, and when we first started discussing this, I did threw a quick question at the Google box. Skeet shooters, trap shooters, they're not fixated on the front sight on that shotgun. They are looking at the pigeon and letting the sights come into their field of view and working with it that way. So it can be done by more than just world-class folks. It's a skill. It's a way to accomplish it.
Yeah.
And I'm still working with it, trying to figure it out for me.
Well, and again, that's why we wanted to talk about this, because you're probably going to see this thrown around more. And, going back to Gunsight, which is, as we've said often, is the mothership of firearms training. Colonel Cooper built Gunsight, and he was the one who codified the modern technique after seeing what really worked. But one of the things that Gunsight prides itself on is they are not technique of the week. The doctrine certainly changes, but it changes on a pace that makes sure that whatever you're changing to is actually better rather than popular. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
So be interesting to be at the Rangemaster conference when this little idea starts popping up.
I will go out on a limb, not terribly far on a limb, and say this may not be something that sees its way into the gunsight curriculum in the near future.
Yeah.
Not saying it's bad, I think it's good. It's something that's out there. It's something that's being discussed. It's been out there for a while. Because I know when I took a pistol class from this gentleman, Pat, back in 2010, it wasn't something he just encountered that week.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the thing for me, and this will be the concern of the brain trust at Gunsight, is if folks are a for lack of a better word, a duly qualified shooter, they are competent at shooting to some level, but this could be misconstrued, say, to that whole why even bother with the sights. And I think that's mainly my takeaway on all this is not saying just ignore the sights, just look at your target and bang away, because I think everybody agrees that's how you miss, even at close range.
And the adherents of this aren't saying don't use the sights. They're not saying the sights have no purpose for existing. All they're saying is the visual attention is on what you're trying to hit, not on the front sight. So the sights are still being used. It's just the specific hard focus is on where you want the projectiles to go, the small spot you want to hit, with the sights coming into alignment right in between the eyes in that spot, rather than fixating on the front sight and then letting that hopefully appear in the center of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I know
and that
semantics and we're close to how many angels on the head of a pin, but there is a difference in terms of where that visual attention goes.
Yeah. Yeah. And that kind of describes my battle that I've documented quite a bit here on the Guns Magazine podcast of transitioning to optics, pistol mounted optics, because I have no idea. Hundreds of thousands of presentations with a pistol. And it's from day one is front sight focus, and I even had a friend who had changed his mouse cursor to a pistol sight to reinforce that idea of in a fight, front sight, get that flash sight picture and, see that front sight clearly and put it on the target. So my problem, as I said, is when I went to a pistol optic, now suddenly you're not looking at that front sight, you're superimposing the optic between you and the target. And I've also had the same problem since I generally carry an optic for my carry gun, but doing what we do for a living, I carry other guns. And I always make sure I do ample presentations, if not go to the range and practice before I will carry a gun. But that's the nature of the beast, is we have to carry different guns. And it worries me that now that I've got the optic thing in my brain, it's hard to move back to iron sights. And the backup pistol in my truck that I just checked to make sure was there this morning is iron sights. I don't want to use an optic on that particular pistol. So is this going to be maybe the halfway, the 6 of one, half a dozen of the others for pistols, you think?
It's a progression. Could it be the frontage road next to the highway we're traveling down? Right? It could well be. Because I see folks who go to optics being able to come back to irons this way, and it's not going back to that traditional, very, very attentive focus on the front sight. Yeah. It is a way to continue doing what they've been doing, which is being more focused on what they're trying to hit. But even the most ardent adherents of this and proponents of this are still saying, I'm still using the sights. They're still in my line of sight. I still have sight alignment. I'm just not fixated on the front sight.
And just so we're clear, what kind of ranges are we talking? This is not something where you're, somebody's 40 yards out and you need to take that shot. I mean, or is it?
I've heard them push it as far as 25 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about, I'm still looking at the chest. And when you start thinking about shooting dots, and I don't know if you were in the class, if you've been in the classes we've done down at Gunsight. I know you've been down with one of the ones I thought, but we've worked the dots back 35, 50 yards beyond that, even on targets that have a scoring area akin to what they are on a human thoracic cavity, the upper chest. Not the whole chest, but the hit area. And we have kept people on hitting that steel more often than not, focused on that, letting the dot, the reticle appear, whatever it is, and then working the trigger in such a way that they're not disturbing.
That makes sense because I think it was the one you were teaching. It was a media event, and I think that was what we went back to was 100, and that was the shoot off. And most of the shooters at least got a hit at 100, and then it became a matter of how many you got. But it was pretty eye opening, so to speak. That again, it's about working the trigger. But for me, the big thing is this is a technique that. This is not what you hand the new shooter and say, go to it. You should still certainly learn to work the sights, learn what sight alignment is, et cetera, right?
So that you know what you're seeing. If you've never worked sight alignment or sight picture, I'll argue you don't know what you're seeing when you're trying to have that soft focus.
Yeah.
If I don't know what this, I don't know what this looks like, right? The way the camera's showing it correctly, it's not lined up correctly for me, but the camera's the right way. Right? If I don't know what this looks like, then I can't look at what I'm trying to hit and have that reference in my field of view.
Interesting, fascinating. So it's sort of an evolving term and technique, but probably something that's going to be more and more of a conversation. But I would also point out, borrowing the words from American Handgunner editor Tom McHale, who pointed out that shooters tend to be binary. Only this technique works, and no, only this technique works, and no, only that technique works. And we tend to be a little bit that way. And is that some of the argument you see online where folks are debating this?
I think there's some of that. Right, kind of like the Gun of the Week Club. I think there's also the terminology, and people may not hear what's said the way it's said. If that makes sense, right? Because
when did this become a thing?
We were talking about the Acorn podcast we did recently, right? And we both said what we said, and we've gotten feedback on both ends of the spectrum. So folks on either end heard it different.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be that in.
Well, certainly going to be interesting, and I'm sure you'll be part of that conversation at Gunsight. And like I said, I tend to stay off the internet because I get aggravated. But since you are actively out there teaching and you need to know about this stuff, and I'm glad that you brought this to my attention because it sounds like it's going to be a topic that is going to be around for a while. And heck, one of these days, this may be the accepted technique. So,
and it's been around for a while. It's not new.
Yeah. Well, it's new to me, so it's new, right?
Yeah, yes. Brand new to you.
Exactly. Well, great. As I said, Erick is the editor of AmericanCop.com. And American Cop, we haven't talked about it in a while. It's not strictly for cops. You want to give the elevator pitch for AmericanCop.com?
So American Cop is kind of the tactical side. I hate to use the T word, but it's kind of the tactical side of the firearms media group. Tom's got American Handgunner. We know that's all specifically focused on pistols. You've got guns, which is a much broader spectrum of it. Pistols, shotguns, rifles. American Cop was originally very cop-centric. It went away, came back. We've tried to make it kind of a cross somewhere between the old SWAT magazine that I wrote for and you wrote for, with it being preparedness stuff that applies across the whole spectrum, as well as the original intent of American Cop, which was that we touched on things relevant to law enforcement. And we took a little bit deeper dive on those. So some focus on law enforcement, some focus for decent, normal humans.
Decent, normal Earth people, like all of us now. So, well, Erick, keep us apprised and let us know whatever the bleeding edge of shooting technology and training is. I can always count on you for that because, like I said, I'm the little curmudgeon down in my little curmudgeon hole down in the dirt. So, anyway, check out AmericanCop.com. And Erick, we thank you for joining us yet again on the Guns Magazine podcast. It was great talking to Erick Gelhaus about soft focus shooting, and I learned a lot. It'll be interesting to see how this thing shakes out and whether it becomes more widely accepted. Well, before we go, I'd like to remind you to please check out our great sponsor, 4Patriots. If you go to 4Patriots.com, type in /GunMag, You can see a special page with all the deals and discounts exclusively for the Guns Magazine podcast audience for all your preparedness needs and supplies. That's forpatriots.com. Type in /gunmag for deals and discounts. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. On behalf of everybody who works here at Firearms Marketing Group, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat, reminding you, now get out there and get shooting.